Urban development for residents of Scarborough, landowners, and the general public. Tonight's dialogue will give the public an opportunity to contribute to the design in a way that when the master plan is completed, Tobago will have a clearer picture of what the city of Scarborough will look like and how it will function. This evening we have 5 presenters who will present to you. Let's get right to the stage. To our panelists. Tonight we have Joshua Stewart, lead architect, Miss Salisha Duke, project manager, Mr. Kevon Trestrail, specialist civil engineer, Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, Mr. Atiba Martin, specialist civil engineer, Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, and Mr. Alvin Thompson, urban planner, joining us via Zoom. At this time, we would like to recognize the presence of the Honorable Fali Augustine, Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, joining us live in studio this evening. We also wish to take the time to recognize our dignitaries on Zoom. Infrastructure Secretary Trevor James and other secretaries, Assistant Secretary in the Division of Infrastructure Joel Sampson and other Assistant Secretaries, residents and the landowners of Scarborough and the general public. Welcome, welcome, welcome. If you are viewing via Facebook or YouTube and would like to get a closer connection with the panelists, now is the time to get in on Zoom. WhatsApp the line 73 works. That is 739-6757, powered in part by B Mobile. Life is on. You can also send questions and comments to us via publicconsult.diqudtha@gmail.com, via Facebook at spc.tobago and diqud, or via YouTube at DIQUD Works, at DIQUD space Works. That is DIQUD space Works. Tonight our first panelist is Mr. Joshua Stewart. Joshua Stewart is an RIBA chartered architect and the principal of Geometrics Limited. He studied at London South Bank University, where he obtained a master's in architecture and was awarded the Departmental Final Year Prize for undergraduate architecture at London South Bank University. He is a highly motivated and creative architect with over 20 years experience in the built environment. Stuart is knowledgeable in international building codes and systems with a wealth of experience as a lead architect and design coordinator for small and major design projects. Some of his projects that he has worked on includes Cabildo Chambers and Red House, FCB Scarborough Branch, Brian Lara Stadium, and Luxury Villa. Mr. Stuart, welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Grant. Pleasant good afternoon to my fellow panelists and all the viewers online. I'm happy to be here again to present to you the proposal for the Scarborough Redevelopment Plan. And as we all know, when it comes to developing cities, the promise of jobs and prosperity, among other factors, pulls people to the cities. Half of the global population already lives in cities, and by 2050, 2/3 of the world's people are expected to be living in urban areas. The increased population density affects water quality, insufficient water availability, waste disposal problems, and high energy consumption. So this requires strong city planning with essential management to deal with these issues. And hence the reason why the current administration is looking to redevelop Scarborough. Botanic Gardens is one of the main areas of our redevelopment of Scarborough. Currently it is underused by the public and visitors. So our aim is to make it more user-friendly by having educational displays, art exhibitions, book rooms, open-air theater, musical performances, and facilities for wedding reception and other entertainment. This will require improving the hardscape area, pavement, walls, planters, gazebos, ponds, etc. So these are some drone footage of the Botanic Gardens. And southward of the gardens, there are two large open spaces, which is intersected by Gardenside Street. There is, on the right-hand side, we're going to have the multi-story car park with commercial space, and on the left-hand side, we're going to have the transport hub for PTSC buses and local taxis. And these two buildings will be connected by a skywalk, and this is to avoid interrupting the traffic along Gardenside Street. Also, we intend to deal with the flooding issue in downtown Scarborough, and we have two engineers on the panel who will elaborate later on these issues. Also, we are proposing to connect Gardenside Street into the port area. Another main aspect of our development is the strip of land between Custom Street and Castry Street. It's a prime location for accommodation for visitors. So we'll have to have some discussions with the landowners in this area to develop the commercial and residential space. Another key aspect of our development is the Tiantec area. Tiantec will be relocated at Cove, and a government plaza to house all government departments will be incorporated it into this area. And this development will go from TNTech all the way back to the highway, Claude Noel Highway. And again, we'll have to have discussions with the landowners concerning this development. Another key element of our development is the housing scheme, which is on the northern side of the Claude Noel Highway. And this scheme will be connected to downtown Scarborough by cable cars and a skywalk crossing the highway, again to avoid disrupting the traffic flow along the highway and also to minimize vehicular traffic throughout Scarborough. The historic center will begin from downtown Castries Street, going all the way up to the Methodist Church, which leads to Fort King George. The streetscape along Castries Street will be redeveloped to reflect the historical nature of uptown Scarborough, which will also require consultation with landowners. So we look forward to have an amicable relationship with the landowners of Scarborough in our drive to redevelop and enhance the city of Scarborough to benefit all Tobagonians. Thank you.
Thank you for that realistic display of how we can transform Scarborough and of the transformation that will take place not only to the existing infrastructure, but that the new things that will come in place, like the new housing and historical centers and a more pleasant walk through our city center. I am sure that the landowners of Scarborough are looking forward to this new and reformed Scarborough. And to help bring that picture more to life, we'll have Mr. Alicia Duke that will present for us the case for Scarborough. Now, Ms. Duke is a project coordinator in the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development. She served Tobago in the Tobago House of Assembly for 13 years, 11 of which she has served in the capacity of a project manager. She has managed projects at the Office of the Chief Secretary, with the latest being the expansion of the Codler Hall Administrative Complex and the PRDI refurbishment. She is the holder of a MSc in Project Management and Evaluation from the University of the West Indies and a Bachelor's in Business Administration with a concentration in Finance and Human Resource Management from the University of New Brunswick and a Technician's Diploma in Construction from City and Guild. Ms. Duke, the case for Scarborough.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to the Chief Secretary, Honorable Mr. Fali Chavez Augustin. Good afternoon to the Secretary for the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries, Urban Development, Mr. Trevor James. Assistant Secretary for the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, Mr. Joel Sampson. All the Secretaries and Assistant Secretaries logged on. Good afternoon. Landowners, residents of Scarborough, Tobagonians, good afternoon. We are here yet another afternoon to discuss with you Scarborough, your community, our city. It is necessary that the narrative of Scarborough shift from shantytown and haphazard development to one that is in positive and befitting of a city. And therefore, the fundamental rationale for the development project is to reverse the persistent decline of Scarborough by suggesting solutions to help eradicate them. The vision for Scarborough is to build a resilient city that blossoms in the face of environmental and social disturbance, to design a place and space where people would want to work, live, and play, and to stimulate economic growth by investing in the city's infrastructure and services. Mr. Stewart has presented to you a conceptual master plan showcasing the possibilities of how our capital can develop. Some elements of focus in the plan included relocated employment to the city through the construction of a government campus, creating an attractive and functional physical environment, providing good transportation system and the associated infrastructure, and making better use of underdeveloped or undeveloped spaces within our city. Stakeholders, be cognizant that with a better developed Scarborough exists the opportunity of attracting greater business investment. Know that with a better developed Scarborough exists the opportunity to capitalize on city tourism. Know that with a better developed Scarborough exists the opportunity for economic growth. Know that with a better developed Scarborough, there will be an increase in property value. Know that with a better developed Scarborough, without a question, will improve the lives of the residents and neighboring communities. It must never be understated that the tremendous potential our city holds. We as a collective should do our utmost to work together so the redevelopment of Scarborough can become our reality, as the benefits derived from this grand infrastructure project far outweigh any associated cost. Residents and landowners, we understand the value of protecting your heritage, and thus your acquaintance with the area of Scarborough could help us identify key elements within the district and advise how it should be protected. In local parlance, you born and grow there, you should have information for tell we how to preserve the community. TOBAGOnians, you are also one of our major stakeholders, and therefore your opinion, your concern, your voice matters to us. We are providing you with this platform to hear from you. Thank you very much.
With that riveting opening from Ms. Duke, that speaks to a place to live and grow and work, a place for economic activity to thrive, it is only fitting that now we introduce you to Mr. Alvin Thompson to speak to us on zoning in Scarborough, Central's business district, conflicts, confluences, and possibilities. Dr. Alvin Thompson grew up in Delaford. He is interested in urban planning, and he focuses primarily on housing and human settlements. More recently, his research work has focused on governance, responses to the impacts of high-level sea rise on coastal cities. Dr. Thompson is currently a postdoctoral fellow in the Faculty of Applied Sciences, Center for Interactive Research on Sustainability at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. In his current work, he uses social ecological systems thinking as an entry point to study how global and local drivers of climatic and environmental change create multiple impacts for coastal systems and littoral communities. Relatedly, his work draws on governance research to study how legislative and policy arrangements could enable or constrain adaptations to the impacts on climate change. Dr. Thompson, we welcome your discussion this afternoon on zoning in Scarborough's central businesses. Dr. Thompson, welcome.
Good evening, Madam Moderator, and good evening to the people of Tobago. I was listening to my bio and it seemed rather elaborate and convoluted, perhaps confusing at times. Let me say a wonderful evening to all the people who have taken the time to make themselves available for these consultations. As looking at my topic, sorry, before I continue, my understanding is that the Honorable Chief Secretary, Fali Chavez Agustin, is listening to these and viewing these proceedings. So let me say welcome to, I prefer to call him the Chief Servant of Tobago. I also want to say welcome to the Secretary Responsibility for Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, the Honorable Trevor James, the Assistant Secretary in the Division, Joel Sampson, all secretaries and assistant secretaries who might be viewing on different social media platforms or who might be in the room. So my topic this evening is zoning Scarborough Central Business District. Conflicts, confluences, and possibilities. As I was rethinking my topic, it suddenly dawned on me that the process of planning really is a conflicting process. You know, we come to these sessions and we have divergent views, but that is part of the process. We shouldn't see that as anything outside of the process of planning. Planning is sometimes described as a very messy process. But during those deliberations, there are areas that we agree on. You know, we agree that we should preserve the environment of Scarborough. We agree that we should preserve the environment of Tobago. And at the end of the day, between those conflicts and confluences, we have to come to the point where we say, yes, these discussions have been fruitful, and this is what we think is possible in Tobago. This is how we see a new Scarborough. So the focus of my presentation this evening, and if you have been following my presentations all along, I like to say what I'm doing so I can put boundaries around my discussions. So if you try to engage me later on, you know exactly what I was talking about. All right. So one is to locate Scarborough within a wider integrated regional planning framework. Two is to define Scarborough's Central Business District. Planners often talk about this idea of CBDs. Three, to identify development standards for Scarborough and indeed for other cities in Trinidad and Tobago. These standards are set by, as you know, town and country planning. The fourth one is to identify land use clusters. The last one is to introduce a proposal for interactive open source zonal mapping. Of course. So I got this information of the strategic development plan for Trinidad and Tobago. I thought it was very useful because in my first presentation, I spoke about Scarborough, the city of Scarborough, and I also spoke about this idea of a greater Scarborough region. And I found this in the National Development Strategy for Trinidad and Tobago. I think it was written between 2010, 2015. And if you look carefully, you would see Southwest Tobago, and using the key, you would see Scarborough stretching right back down into Southwest Peninsula, as I like to call it. So this idea of major urban clusters. What I found interesting about this map is that only one area in Tobago was identified for port development. And I know that there were some background studies done to decide where ports should be located. I couldn't find those studies, but they are available. And it would be interesting to see what information went in to identifying the port of Scarborough as the only port in Tobago for port development. So this puts the Scarborough project within this idea of integrated planning region. All right, and the information I showed you on the previous slide is this is just a smaller scale. Again, you can see the only area in Scarborough, in Tobago, that has been identified for a port is that area in Scarborough. And you would note that Cove is there. And many Tobagonians have said that Cove would be perhaps an alternative location for a port. But this study did not identify Cove as one of those areas. Interesting. And this is I put this slide in to give you an idea of the number of ports that were proposed for Trinidad and Tobago. Ironically, only one port was proposed for Tobago, and about 10 ports were proposed for Trinidad. So when you're planning for a city, you make plans, but as all planners will know, those plans have to be premised on certain development standards. My intention this evening was to share the standards and the selected areas for development for Scarborough. Unfortunately, during my research, I was unable to find Scarborough specific standards for residence and commercial development. What I did, just to give you an idea of how these things are done, is to take the information for Port of Spain, just to give you an idea of how the standards are used. So you would see on the left side, it says proposed community. And for each area, this has Rising Road, Victoria Square, Phillip Street, and so on. The boundaries of those development areas will be clearly defined. And then for each core, residential and commercial, the standards will be clearly established. I was unable to find these for Scarborough Tobago, so I just put those in for Port of Spain. And these are the kind of broad definition of these standards for residential use and for commercial use. So the Town and Country Planning has come up with these broad categories, and as planners, we use them to guide our proposals and suggestions for development in certain areas. Of course, the plan of Scarborough would have to be guided by these. And this is the one for mixed use, or mixed residential and commercial use. And in my next few slides, you'll realize that the entire Scarborough, almost the entire Scarborough, really is a mixed use city. So I'll go through this very quickly. My intention for these slides is to give you an idea of some of the areas that Josh has identified for development, and to just zero in on how those areas are factoring now with the standards that have been established by Town and Country Planning. So my first cluster, commercial institutional cluster, and Bay Street. The boundaries of this cluster would be Bay Street, Northside Road, Coiler Street, Fort Street, Mackay Hill Street, Young Street, and Robinson Street. So this is the, if you will, the uptown cluster. My second cluster is the cluster that this project really revolves around. Joshua has done a fantastic job in giving us a conceptual design of what a new port will look like. And this I call cluster B. This is purely a commercial cluster. All right, so it is bounded by Carrington Street or Carrington/Milford Street on the north, by Bay Street on the east, and by Rockley Bay. The next cluster is cluster C, would be institutional and commercial. When I say institutional, what I mean is, so if you have a church, a government building, schools, all those fall under institutional and commercial. So this is that area that's bounded by Cloudwell Highway on the north, Garden Street on the east, Northside Road, goes a bit into Northside Road, Carrington Street on the south, and Wilson Road on the west. That's cluster C. What I'm doing here is dividing the city of Scarborough into clusters so we can think through what exists now and the plans that Joshua has advanced for development in these different areas, different clusters, if you will. Cluster D, I call a commercial, institutional, residential, and recreational cluster. And this is bounded by Cloudwell Highway in the north, all right, Wilson Road on the east, Carrington Street south, Dutch Fort on the west. And again, this is a cluster. As you go further down Milford Road, you would see this cluster. You could observe a secondary school, Light and Light, on the north there, next to Cloudwell Highway. And if you remember from his first presentation, Josh has suggested that this area would be developed into an urban park. So this is one of the clusters that has been earmarked for further development. Cluster F is institutional commercial, and this is going down to Shore Park. Josh's plan has not included, did not include this cluster, but given the impact that a new Scarborough would have on these other areas, I thought it prudent to include Shore Park area as a cluster. And the final cluster is cluster G. and I call this industrial, institutional, commercial, and recreational cluster, is bounded by Claude Nowell Highway on the north, Darrell Spring on the east, Rockley Bay on the south, and an imaginary line running from the Claude Nowell Highway down to Rockley Bay. Okay, so that is how I would think through Scarborough for redevelopment. So we could have a discussion around, okay, which cluster am I talking about? Am I talking about cluster A, the uptown cluster, or cluster B, the one right in stack in the middle of the city? What are the current land uses in each of these clusters, and how do they dovetail with Joshua's plan for this redevelopment of Scarborough? Now, I see all these coming together. That is Joshua's plan, my suggestion for clusters coming together as part of this process of consultations in what I call an interactive open source zoning and land use map. We do not have one for Tobago, as far as I'm aware. We do not have one for Trinidad and Tobago. The one I'm showing you is one for the city of London and Ontario. But it gives you an idea of where we are going with this project. And at some point in time, we will produce this interactive open source map, meaning that anybody who is in this room now, or anybody who is looking at us on Facebook or any of the other platforms, could go online, access this map, and look at what we are doing. And I'll give you a demonstration in the few minutes I have left. So if you hold down your control key, you could click on the map, and that is supposed to open up the map. It's taking some time to load because my computer is a bit slow. It's requires a lot of data. Just bear with me for 1 second. Yeah, it's taking a bit of time to load. So while it's loading and my time is going, I will just say, so, okay, so it's loaded now. So if you notice, it says layer list on the right-hand side. So imagine when Josh has taken his work another step. What you would be able to do in Tobago and anywhere in the world is look at a map of Scarborough and click on any one of these, all right, and highlight what we propose to do with Scarborough. So this is, for example, electoral wards. I could look at emergency services or planning districts or recycling and garbage collection, all right, schools. All right. So at the end of this consultative process, or not the end perhaps, but the next phase, our hope is to build out this kind of open source interactive map where all the ideas, suggestions that you have put forward would form part of this open source data. It's part of this process of accountability, of transparency, and wherever you are in the world, you will be able to access an interactive map of the city of Scarborough. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Residents of Scarborough, we hope that so far you are excited and you have all your ideas written down to share in the open forum, but we're not there just yet. Up next, we have two engineers from the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development addressing Scarborough's infrastructural gaps. This evening, we have Mr. Kevon Trestrail and Mr. Atiba Martin. Mr. Trestrail holds the title of Specialist Civil Engineer. He began working in the Division of Infrastructure and Public Utilities in 2003 as a junior civil engineer. He has worked in all aspects of the division, from building design and construction to road design and road resurfacing. This generalized background allows him to have a keen perspective of the Scarborough redevelopment to see many of the various proposals from different angles. Mr. Martin began serving the division as a civil engineer in 2005. As a specialist civil engineer, He has focused on mega assembly projects, specializing in project management and contract administration. Aside, Martin's career has seen him providing design consultancy in his private capacity. Mr. Trestrail and Mr. Martin, welcome.
Thank you. Greetings to the Chief Secretary, Honorable Farley Augustine, Secretary for Infrastructure, Mr. Trevor James, and Assistant Secretary Joel Sampson. Greetings to the panel, residents of Scarborough, members of the public, and all those viewing on the different social platforms. My name is Kevin Trestrail. I'm a specialist civil engineer with Division of Infrastructure. On my left is Mr. Tiba Martin, also a specialist civil engineer with the division. Today, it is our opportunity to discuss the infrastructure associated with the Scarborough redevelopment. So what is infrastructure? In basic terms, infrastructure is the essential facilities, services, and organization structures for all cities and communities. Infrastructure falls within two main categories, hard and soft. For our discussion, we will continue with the hard infrastructure. This is transportation infrastructure, roads, bridges, sidewalks, wet infrastructure, water supply, water treatment, water resource management. We have the energy infrastructure, grids, power stations, and finally information infrastructure, communications and network services. The importance of infrastructure can never be understated. As quoted, well-maintained infrastructure is perhaps the most striking and observable difference between impoverished nations and prosperous ones. Studies on infrastructure indicate that for each $100 US spent, boosts private sector output by 13 to 17 US. Higher quality and more efficient infrastructure will boost productivity, lifting long-term economic growth and wages. Now, Scarborough exists. So what is the existing infrastructure that we find in Scarborough? We have asphalt roads ranging from 3.5 to 12 meter widths. We have concrete bridges. We have concrete sidewalks. We have water distribution networks in the form of buried lines in our roadways. We have water treatment facilities. We have flood management, power distribution, overhead lines, power generation, emergency power supply by TNTech, and we have hardline communication, copper and fiber optics in our overhead lines. We also have present wireless communication 4G capabilities. As we talk about infrastructure and developing it, we talk about sustainable infrastructure development. A sustainable infrastructure incorporates eco-friendly practices, green spaces, and supporting technology into Scarborough to reduce air pollution and CO2 emissions. These can lead to a healthier environment for city residents and a lower carbon footprint for Scarborough. The infrastructure we envision going forward, we have permeable asphalt roads. This allows runoff to filter through the asphalt to be collected for reuse. We envision lanes for electrical trams to move persons around Scarborough, charging stations for electric vehicles, shaded sidewalks, wider sidewalks, mini desalination plants to provide 24-hour water supply, all wastewater, grey and black, collected and sent to sewer plants, flood management through the creation of green spaces with detention basins, our power distribution network moving from overhead to underground lines, power generation, solar panels on building roofs, and planning for 5G and beyond, reducing the prevalence of the physical lines. As presented, there is now the opportunity to make the necessary adjustments to jump the gap and allow Scarborough to be among the first to be a green, sustainable city. I now hand you over to Mr. Martin, who will continue the presentation.
Thank you, Kevon. All protocols observed. and special good evening to all our viewers. We have to ask ourselves, how do we re-engineer Scarborough? Well, we propose a 5-pronged approach. First, beginning with establishing an economic vision for Tobago and addressing some of the legal issues that we have, developing a technical approach and a financial approach, and then the implementation. Economic vision. A clear directive must be developed among Tobago stakeholders which answers the question, what is the Tobago economy going to be based on, and what do we envision our lifestyles to look like in the future? This is the underpinning of the Scarborough Urban Redevelopment Project, and by extension, the development of Tobago as a whole, and it must be supported by relevant and accurate data. The legal issues. We want to focus on 3. The Town and Country Planning Department must be brought under the executive control of the Tobago House of Assembly on the merit of Tobago's right to develop its own space as a unique people with its own history, identity, and aspirations. We have to reform the Foreign Investment Act. We need to craft an act that can encourage foreign direct investment without losing Tobago in the process, and thereby creating a balance between local and foreign investors. Compulsory acquisition. We must get landowners in Tobago to work harmoniously with the development agenda through education and by producing compelling, beneficial plans. Technical approach. The technical approach draws its guidance first from the land use policy. We must therefore finalize the land use policy for Tobago, with that of Scarborough being a subset. To the right of the slide is the present land use policy for Tobago. Taking a closer look, we look at the land use policy for Scarborough as it exists now. And you would note that the previous presenters would have described what is envisioned. So the plan going forward would be to modify what we see here in keeping with our ideals and what we projecting for Scarborough in the future. Presently, most of the environment around Scarborough is designated for urban development. Some areas for commercial, shown in the red, and some areas for industrial, shown in the magenta. So again, it's on us for now going forward to then craft something new and modify what we have presently to reflect the goals and the ambitions of the island of Tobago going forward. Now, with a land use policy in place, we can then project what the increased infrastructural demands will be placed on Scarborough as the urban center. This expected demand is what we have to gauge now and prepare for now. For instance, if we look at the slide again, in the illustration there, we could very well imagine in the future that most of our demand will be coming from the urban centers in the southwest. Also, there will be demands from, at any given time, coming from visitors from Trinidad. There will be less demand coming from places like Plymouth in the north. And what that will do collectively is describe how the infrastructure would be distributed and the size that must be allocated in the spaces and what type of infrastructure. When we understand the demands, we can then convert those increased demands to design parameters which will then inform design solutions. Examples of these are the annual average daily traffic, which would determine the road sizes that we need to adopt. Another parameter is the peak rain runoff, which will determine the type of drainage features, whether we go in with detention ponds, box drains, even some of the, what Mr. Terrestrial would have mentioned with the permeable pavements to keep the runoff down. This is the kind of parameters that we need to find figures and come up with figures for. At the next stage, we'll seek to filter the draft solutions and accept only workable, affordable, realistic, and sensible ones. Stakeholder feedback will be an important feature at this stage. Our financial approach. We'll have to determine how the new infrastructure will be financed. The options available to us are central government funding, international lending agencies like IADB, Caribbean Development Bank, etc., World Bank. We have the private-public partnerships, bond financing, and grant funding. Implementation. Once all the above processes have completed, we then move to the implementation. A transformation this vast has to recognize the importance of phases as well as short-term and long-term development agendas. Short-term projects. These are quick, relatively inexpensive yet highly noticeable project initiatives that can be done now. They are important to build momentum in the overall development thrust. And I feel very strongly that we need to focus on short-term projects very early and get the ball rolling. Our long-term projects, these will provide the bedrock upon which the economy and the way of life for Tobagonians will lie. Projects can be further phased as required, and some can come on stream as actual demands materialize. I want to segue to the case for the port, because this is a burning issue in the previous discussions, with the question being, can a cruise ship and cargo port coexist in Scarborough? To answer that question, I want to take a look at our next door neighbor, Grenada, and the St. George port, and compare it with the Scarborough port. What you would notice is that both areas are fairly, roughly the same size. They're both built in around low, naturally low or shallow waters. In the case of Tobago, there's a reef around in the Rockley Bay where Red Rock is located. And I'm quite sure, certain based on what I'm seeing here, that some kind of reef formation is natural to the St. George port. But what we find in the St. George port is that they have a terminal here and a pier for the cruise ships, and they have a terminal just to the southeast, that is designated for the cargo port. And what is also interesting about this image is that we could clearly see that some sort of dredging would have taken place in this port at both locations in order to make the project feasible. And because of this, we see no reason why the same can't happen in the port of Scarborough. As a matter of fact, just in terms of logistics, the distance between the terminal and the cruise ship terminal and the cargo terminal in the St. George port is just about 850 meters, less than 1 kilometer. And this can be verified. Anybody can verify this on Google Earth. But if we hop across to Tobago, we could clearly see, and we run the same analysis, we could clearly see that the Bay of Rockley Bay can easily hold both a terminal port for cruise ships and one for cargo. The only difference between these two ports, essentially, is the fact that one is on the Caribbean Sea and one is perched in the Atlantic Ocean. The Scarborough port being the one perched in the Atlantic Ocean. So therefore, that is the only different challenge that we see that we have to treat with if we are to develop that port into a cargo and a cruise ship port. Apart from the obvious, which is the dredging and the reclamation of land to create the terminal for both ports. So the answer to that question is a cruise ship and a cargo port coexisting in Scarborough is technically possible, but will involve dredging and land reclamation as evidenced by what took place in Grenada's port. Because Scarborough Port faces the Atlantic Ocean, a breakwater solution will have to be included in its future development. Further studies will also have to be done to assess the impact of such development and to find ways to mitigate or eliminate negative impacts such as coastal erosion and damage to marine life. The other question is, should such an investment come before or after the economic demand materializes? We believe that yes, it should come before, but it has to be justified by clear initial economic outlook and a vision for Tobago. In the first instance, it should be built with a view to possible future expansion as the economic realities of the future come into being. And thank you for listening. And
thank you, Mr. Trestrill and Mr. Martin. Now, Mr. Trestrill identified what exists now and in terms of the hard infrastructure, what is required for the redevelopment of Scarborough, while Mr. Martin showed us what bridging the gap would mean in terms of that five-pronged approach that he just explained. And so we've come to the point in the program where we know you've all been waiting for. I know I've been waiting for this all evening. It's the open forum where you can interact with us. Give us your thoughts, give us your comments. If you have questions, now is the time. And we have a panel that is waiting to receive your comments and to answer your questions. Now let's do a little bit of housekeeping. If you want to ask a question and you're on Zoom, you are in the right place. All you have to do is raise your virtual hand. I will see and recognize you, and we'll admit you into the meeting to have your first-hand view of asking your questions directly to our panelists. If you are on Facebook or watching via YouTube, you can post your questions in the comment tab, and we will see it and acknowledge your questions and ask it there. Or you can call us. You can call us or WhatsApp us on the line 63WORKS. That is 739-6757. Again, the number is 73WORKS. That is 739-6757. It's powered in part by B-Mobile. Life is on. So we'll head straight to our questions now. Tobago, we are ready for you. You can comment, you can ask your questions. Let's take our first participant. I have via Zoom Carol Beach. Miss Carol, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm very grateful to the division for making this platform available. And I'm even more excited to be a part of the vision for Scarborough's redevelopment. I'm excited in terms of what Scarborough can become. And, you know, I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, what the changes can be. I had a couple of questions or comments or whatever, and I realized that one of them had already been somewhat addressed in some manner, which was the solar powering. And I would like to see that oh, sorry, I can't start the video. I've got issues at the back. But as far as the solar powering of the capital, I am very interested in that. And I was wondering if we could have taken it one step further to lobby central government for legislation for excess solar energy to be fed back to the grid, so that there would be a possible financial remuneration, for want of a better word, in terms of the solar energy for the city. But my vision is that the whole of Scarborough could be solar powered, right? Another point that I wanted to address was the issue of recycling in the city. I know that we have a new recycling center or something, and you know, it's really my vision that we could really maximize the opportunity to have, to promote recycling within the city, so that there'll be, like collection points or things to encourage recycling, because we're talking about environmental awareness and so on. All right. The third thing was, I saw somewhere where there was a consideration for this is purely cosmetic, but I know that, with pedestrian crossings and so on, sometimes drivers do not take their time on the roads. But what they developed was something called like the 3D pedestrian crossings, right? It's not a literal 3D pedestrian crossing, but it's painted on the road as 3D, and we could be the first in the Caribbean to have those in our in Scarborough City. It could be a tourist attraction as well, right? And then the last point was that for our local artisans, I know that they had a display at one point in time in the cultural complex in Shore Park. And I was wondering if there would be any consideration for them to have like a permanent space in Scarborough to display their artistic works and so on for cruise ships coming in. So those were just some of the ideas that I had, and I don't know if anybody could comment on them or if they could be given any consideration. Thank you.
Ms. Beach, thank you for your comments, and don't think that we're skipping you over. I have a strategic plan here, so I'm taking a bunch of questions and then we'll address you. So don't think that we're leaving you out. I have on Zoom, I would love to say the Honorable Rita Pemberton. Dr. Pemberton, welcome, good afternoon. Dr. Pemberton, could you unmute your mic, please, so that we can hear you? I see you trying to speak. Okay, while we wait on Dr. Pemberton to get with us, we have a question from Facebook. What Bentic surveys have been completed to ensure what is feasible for infrastructure development based on the size of the location? What Bentic surveys have been completed to ensure what is feasible for infrastructural development based on the size of the location? So the person that asked that on Facebook, I know that our panelists will take your comment, I would say, into consideration, because the surveys at this point, we're gathering information from you, right, so that we can understand what you need, what we want Scarborough to look like, what Tobago wants Tobago to be. And so the next step would be when we conduct all of those feasibility surveys and all of that types of things. So they will consider all those types of studies that has to take place to ensure that what is done is what could be done, and it is done in the best way that it should be done. So in the meantime, I will ask Mr. Martin and Mr. Trestrail, or anyone else on the panel for a matter of fact, to just briefly address the comments / questions by Ms. Bish on solar power, 3D pedestrian crossing spaces for local artisans. How does all of that factor into what we will consider for the design?
Sure. Ms. Frank, let me take this one initially. The solar panel is definitely something that's picking up steam throughout the world. There has been great strides in technology improvement that now make them a bit more viable than they were a few years ago. Going forward, as mentioned, is something that will be looked at, where we can see the reduction on power from Tiantec and the gas supply we could generate out of it. In some countries, it has been proposed that if your house generates enough power, you can give it back to the grid. I'm not sure in what capacity Tiantec is ready for that, but definitely looking ahead, it's something that we should be encouraging more of the population to be heading towards.
Thank you, Mr. Trestrail. We have Dr. Pemberton on. Her mic is now unmuted. Good evening, Dr. Pemberton.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity. I have a number of issues that I would like to hear. First, let's deal with the Rocky Bay development, cargo cruise ship And I saw that Mr. Martin mentioned land reclamation, dredging. And immediately he mentioned too, it was likely to affect coastal erosion, damage to marine life. I would like to raise the issue of the submarine heritage. You know, the Rockley Bay was a very historic point in the early years of European presence in Tobago. And dredging and port expansion certainly would affect submarine heritage items if there has been no attempt to recover them before such activity takes place. So I would like to know whether or not that matter has been given any consideration, and if so, when and how. My second concern has to do with just a simple understanding. What are the boundaries of Scarborough? You hear the different plans, but it is not clear to me where Scarborough starts and ends. As far as I know, there's one sign by Cooks River which says end of the town of Scarborough, but it does not. There are no other places where such signs are. So it would be useful to provide that information for general understanding. And my third issue has to do with what would we do with respect to wastewater management, sewage, because drainage, sewage are problems in Scarborough and the western side of the island. And is this Scarborough development going to focus with respect to flooding and drainage only on Scarborough? Because I see the thing related to what happens further down, further west. But that was not my last question. My last question is really the one closest to my heart. That something was mentioned about developing the strip of land, Gassery Street area, and something was mentioned about going up to the fort. Has any consideration been given to the creation of what one would call historic Scarborough? That is, in your urban redevelopment, you maintain a Scarborough that has a historical footprint. Thank you. Those are my comments and questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pemberton, and I am sure we will address your questions very, very shortly. I just want to take Adi before I address your questions. So Adi, welcome and good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. You guys are hearing me?
I am hearing you.
Okay, good. I would like to treat an issue that is often overlooked. It is the issue of restrooms. Now, I joined late, so I don't know if you addressed that. Where in city planning, especially in Trinidad and Tobago, there's little to no thought with regards to restrooms, and families, father and child, mother and child, with accessing restrooms. When you go to the UK, that there are restrooms all over. It was a shock to me, and it was something I didn't know, that they make restrooms for families, male with father and child, mother and child, and nowhere in Trinidad and Tobago infrastructure is that even a thought. That a parent, say they're going shopping for school books or whatever, that a parent may want to change a child or go into a restroom with a child. So if I am a single dad with my kids, if I want to take my child to a restroom, there is no facility available for me. If a mother with a child wants to take a child to the restroom, available space for them. So I would like, with the planning, I'm sure most or all members on the board have traveled, been to the UK. They at least are familiar with that concept. So I like in the planning and the laying out for the infrastructure in Tobago to have that taken into consideration. You could utilize the handicap stall in Mosul. It could be retrofitted, all right, to have a place where you can at least change a child or have access to that. In government buildings as well. I went to register my child in the Aegis building, and for a place that is supposed to facilitate parents with their child to come get their birth papers, it was astonishing that there is nowhere to change your child, your baby, even though every thousands of parents are told to come here and register your child, but there's no place to change your child, even in government buildings. So I would like the city planners and they to take that into consideration when they're laying out, all right, buildings and infrastructure for the city. Thank you. That's my contribution.
Adi, thank you very much. I'm with you, you know, I feel you. I feel you with the bathrooms thing and wanting to change with your child and all of that kind of stuff. And all of those are the types of things that we want to hear. We want to know what you want your Scarborough to look like. Joshua, I'm going to ask you to just address some of Dr. Pemberton's issues, especially those of the submarine historic site that you mentioned at Rocky Bay, and establishing the boundaries of Scarborough. And Mr. Trestrill, if you can address just for a brief moment the wastewater management and how that ties into the entire plan.
Yes, so dealing with the historical footprint, the historical area of Scarborough, we are proposing to start from the bottom of Castry Street all along Crooks River Mall. For example, the streetscape along Castry Street and Burnett Street will be redeveloped to reflect the historical nature of uptown Scarborough. Also, we have plans for the James Park to make it a more interactive park, and also the legislature building will be redeveloped to reflect the historical history of uptown Scarborough. Concerning the boundaries of Scarborough, this will be determined after our feasibility studies, and as you know, there are town and country planning issues that need to be resolved for us to expand and redefine the boundaries of Scarborough.
So I'm going to comment on the drain and sewer issues now. For sewer wastewater, in Scarborough there exists a sewer facility operated by WASA. Currently this facility is not at full capacity, and there are some connections from business places to the sewer line running through Scarborough. What is needed, and it's a project that may soon be in the making, is a focus on connecting almost all properties into the sewer system in Scarborough. This will mean that the use of soakaways and septic tanks will be something of the past. What is proposed as well going forward is that all your grey water, this is water from your kitchen, from your showers, also is connected into the sewer system. We know that Scarborough has, from the 1950s to now, we've had a flooding situation that exists. Not to go too much into the history of what Scarborough was originally, but what is proposed is having green areas that serve as green areas and recreational areas and parks, but also act as detention basins. So when there is a heavy downpour, that those green areas can act as holding bays for the runoff and not go into areas that they are unwanted. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Trestrill. Just a reminder for those of you just logging in, or those of you that missed the information on how to ask a question, you can do so via Zoom by raising your virtual hand. You can do so via Facebook and YouTube by typing your questions into the comment tab. And you can also WhatsApp or call the line 73 works. That is 739-6757, and it's brought in part by B Mobile. Life is on. We have a question. Is there consideration for the differently abled pedestrians to fit into the plan? So, Mr. Stewart, is your plan considering the differently abled pedestrians in Scarborough?
Yes, as we know, Scarborough is very It's a hilly area. So we are proposing to have trams and in some cases cable cars to transport the disabled from downtown Scarborough to uptown Scarborough. And one of the main attractions of Scarborough is the historical center, which is uptown Scarborough. So we are proposing to have trains and trams, like from Custom Street, to take the disabled up to Cash-Free Street, where they can easily traverse throughout the historical center.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. On Zoom, I have Huawei L23. Now, I'd love to know your name, sir or ma'am, but we take your question now.
You ready for me? Heaven high, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you hear? I'm good. This is Alan Smith here, Trinidad. Originally, I'm from Tobago as an architectural technician and also as a cracker works. The English call it cracker works, Americans say side crack. So what I hear all the different people putting their piece. And to keep you all abreast, I worked with the town planners in Tobago from the United Nations in 1964, 67, 68, around there, do all these feasibility studies and most of the designs from Tobago. For instance, I'm moving Shore Park from where it was, not Shore Park, Government Farm from where it was to where it is, and moving those gas chambers, tanks they had it in Scarborough to where they are located at Crown Point. Now another thing, coming to the point, I like most of the things you all put in, but the Deepwater Harbor, they want to make studies carried out that Scarborough is reef. All there was land and it dropped. And you have to be careful about dredging that harbor, all is rock. So they wanted to put it along at Plymouth. What I would like to mention to you all is to bear in mind strongly with the war taking place right now in Ukraine, it could turn out to be a world war. So we have to use funds very carefully, and consideration should be given to those houses that break down in the Crown Point area, about put up infrastructure, build houses for them. Because lots of times when you go about doing development, we're getting money to keep financing the development. It is true that we in the planning area would like to see our plans come true, but those people have no house. And you have to take in the spiritual aspect of the whole program as well. When people have no house to live, and they start to say, so the people building things to make the place look nice, and we ain't have no house, it's likely it's happened that your things go disarray. You can't find the project manager, you can't find the architect, you can't find the specialist engineer, and the money, nobody knows where the money go. So these are things we have to keep in mind very, very strongly to make these people get a house first with whatever money we could turn around with, because in the event a world war starts, we don't know what action, what course it will take. But otherwise, all the things, the different people talk, even the restroom for mothers, fathers with a child, the walkover, extension of Scarborough, all of that is very good. And to keep you all in mind, when I was there, they mentioned Plymouth for the deep water harbor because it's natural deep water, and all the ships coming to Trinidad and Tobago, they pass the offload the goods and then to ship it back to Tobago where cost of living is so high. So if you have the deep water harbor, you could have all the big place for your containers and so on, whether grocery, hardware, or for the stores like the stores, etc., furniture, whatnot coming from away. And you'll be able to put up buildings, hardware, to house these things that come. and to this industrial estate that is in the core field, or the lowlands estate is a Tobago plantation nicknamed Lowlands Estate, and they have the pocket, core, Dipdale, and core. So we could have big warehouses that people outside could come and manufacture things using labor in Tobago, paying in US dollars, and ship out of Tobago because we have a deep water harbor. So these are things to be taken into consideration.
Thank
and
you.
we could also liaise with them with machinery to do agriculture, because Tobago is killing all the way what type of machinery suited for agriculture in Tobago.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. I see that you have a wealth of information there, and so we encourage you to email us at publicconsult.diqudtha@gmail.com. We do look forward to having an email from you where we can delve a little further into all of that lovely information that you were sharing. Reverend Jeremiah Prescott, good evening.
Yes, hello.
Good evening, Reverend Prescott.
Good afternoon.
Yes, good evening.
Bonsoir. Yeah, buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everybody. From what I gather, this afternoon supposed to be the discussion concerning the development of Scarborough. What I would like to point out why Scarborough is in that situation, since I'm a little boy, they never allowed anybody to build in Lower Scarborough because the government said they have town and country planning as to plan it. If you notice, the real Scarborough for residential area go up Burnett Street, and from where the old market was right up to the top of 4th Street, you'll see all the cross streets right up. That was where the bulk of the people live. Downtown Scarborough, all by Morales building, that is where the banks were, those are sugar buns. They brought the sugar in barrels from the sugar estates in Tobago and have them there as a collection behind where the old mall is that they broke down, where the bank was right by the river there. That was the first lavage or dump in Scarborough. I did not know it. I wasn't born yet. And they filled that right back up to where behind by T and Tech there. That was a swamp. You come over Lord's Ground, Sangster Hill. The mall is built in Sangster Hill was a big swamp. Cows used to disappear there. That was a lavash. I only knew it as a boy as Jubilee Ground. They had a big pavilion there, swings, and it was the place you play big cricket grounds, etc. When you leave there, behind by where Warner is, between Smithfield and Warner, where the big drain was, they had a big drain go back to the river. That was swamp. And where Sing Hardware is, I fly kite there. They used to, it didn't have plastic in those days. I talk in 1947, 48, 46. We used to fly kite there Christmas week. And they used to throw sand. They used to cover it with sand. So Scarborough only had, downtown was only fingers. They want to go around to Botanic there. That carry you to the North Coast Road behind Crooks River. You come up and you go to Wilson Road. Wilson Road carried you to Plymouth. Dutch Fort ended on top, where they came down to come back on Wilson Road. When you go to Sangster Hill, that stop on Highmore Estate, way by where Antoine is, by where the school is. So that bound right there, Mount Mary went right up to where Bishops begin and stopped there. I grew up around there. From my age, I will be able to tell you certain things. So all Scarborough was never developed. There is no cross street. You cannot connect Sangster Hill with Mount Mary, neither with Orange Hill Road. The other one was Orange Hill that carried right up to Patience Hill. So you got to get a background of Low Scarborough. It's only in the early 60s they allow one or two people to build downtown Scarborough. That's why it was like that. Tongue and country prevented you. I born and bred in Smithfield. The biggest piece of land downtown Scarborough is Smithfield Estate. That's Mrs. Prescott was my mother. I'm the last of the Prescott clan. And we sold out to the government because you couldn't do anything with it after Hurricane Flora. Smash everything, cocoa, coconut, everything. And you couldn't do one thing, tongue and country, tongue and country. They would not allow you. No, folks that are talking don't know these things. And we sold out and kept 10 acres inside the Smithfield Road. And it took them 18 or more years to fix the road, which was part of the deal. What we need to do is connect. That's why I told the lady in charge, tomorrow she's coming to meet me, and I'll take her and show her certain things. They want to open the road from Mount Mary by the school, come down to meet the Light and Life. They meet as far as the river with the road and they stop. They have to come across and connect it with Smithfield Road and also with Sangster Hill. But the end of Sangster Hill, John Daly, the owner of Highmore Estate, had started to develop the place. There's a road that continues, but they cut the highway across it where you see where the big lamp pole is on the other side there. There is the continuation of the road you have there. Go down into the estate to open Scarborough. You must go up by cross cutters. I know the road. Right down the estate road, come out right before you meet the bridge by the Life and Light there, and came across and then go up that hill there. They had no bridge across the river. So they have to open that. Else Scarborough will be a mess all the time with traffic. So when you come, before you go down to the river, you swing right there, not much to be done, and go up on the estate road. And Daly has sold out those lands, 5-acre plots inside there. So the road is a common road. They had asked the previous government to develop the road there. Scarborough will always be that mess downtown because there's no way out. That's the only way you could get out of Scarborough, by opening up that, build a flyover at the end of Sangster Hill Road, come down into the estate road, and that will ease the traffic. Anytime you're dealing with Scarborough, downtown Scarborough. And also, I want to let you all know that Bulldog Reef, the reason why the British moved to Scarborough, Bulldog Reef extend right up to the back of Bacalet, right past the airport. That's why the boats have to run from way down here. They can't cut across. It's a reef, it's shallow. Scarborough was the only place with a sheltered harbor. Where the breakwater is, they built right there. They didn't have to dredge there. At the end of the breakwater is 75 feet. You have to come. There were 2 red lights. They moved it down, one by Smithfield, but one used to be down by where the jetty is there, and one on thing. And the boats couldn't come in. That is, I'm telling about the SS Tobago, MV Tobago SS Trinidad. They couldn't come in if rain is falling. They have to line up to come in that channel because the channel is very deep. That's the only way into Scarborough. And here folks talking about the reason why Lambo and all of that break away is because of the Deepwater Harbor installed. That's not true. I used to walk as a boy from Lambo River right up Rockley Bay, right into, where you call it there, right by the wharf, right up past Sansa Hill. It was a good bay right down. But what they did from by Brinkley's building after you pass the old hotel, where licensing office used to be, had a lot of trees. It's clay on top. That's a clay hill. And they cut down all the big trees that were there and said they're making scenery. And from the time they did that, the clay started to go out in the sea. And that's a historical fact. I ain't giving you about what scientists and all the cat fancy. I telling you what went on. All right. Because at my age, I'm 84. So I know what went on and what others told me before. So Scarborough downtown, anybody building anything now. Notice, Tongue and Country is not really enforcing the law. All over Tobago, Tongue and Country, all they do, they put up your building and say it's, what do you call it there? Unlawful building. They have pictures in there. And that's all. Anybody could do anything in Scarborough. And they get away with it. So you have to have connector road. There's another road by the Pentecostal church, by the Catholic school. The main road for that development of the houses. All right. It went right down to Steel River. Straight down. What has happened? The Catholic school cut off the road. I took Mr. Sandy and the engineer there and tell them, you can carry this road, just get a strip from Wassa, between Smithfield and Wassa, and build a road there and put it there. So this is what is going on. They're doing everything without any proper planning.
Pastor Prescott.
And that's why Lower Scarborough is like that.
Reverend Prescott, I know that you have a lot of history about Scarborough and you are very, very passionate about the history, and we really want to get that information. I know we have a site visit scheduled tomorrow, and further than that, we want to invite you to send us an email or any information that you may have, because you have so much historic information, to publicconsult.diqudtha@gmail.com. We have a few more participants on, and so we want to remind you, once you're on, once you're in, we want to give everyone an opportunity to give their comments, to air their concerns. So try to be as brief as possible in the first instance, and once we have more time, we will take you again for your second questions. Okay, so let's try Mr. Dave Elliott. Good afternoon. Good evening.
Yes, good afternoon. I would I think make just a few points. Firstly, I think Pastor Prescott is very correct. My father would have worked on the estate along with Mr. Prescott, with Reverend Prescott. So he does have a lot of institutional knowledge about Lower Scarborough, and he's very correct. I think Dr. Pemberton would have asked a question earlier. This is regarding the wrecks, the historical wrecks. I think the person that answered didn't understand clearly what she was speaking about. The Battle of 1677 between the French and the Dutch that took place in Tobago on Ash Wednesday resulted in as much as over 20 ships sunk under the harbor here in Scarborough, Tobago. Presently, I think Scarborough has about 5 rivers that empty into the sea right there. So you wouldn't see the hull of a ship in the water. What you would see is what I call shipwreck sites. You would find ballast stones and anchor, cannon, those kind of things in the water, right? So the question I think Dr. Pemberton was asking, has there been anything put in place regarding the protection of these underwater wrecks and relics that are presently in the sea, in the harbor there? That's the first thing. Previously, I saw that there was a few maps showing, but pretty much to justify that Scarborough needs a harbor, because all the other Caribbean islands have harbors. All of their harbors and ports are on the Caribbean side and very protected areas. Even Port of Spain is a giant lake, and because of the shape of the island, it's very protected, right, from the Atlantic side. But Scarborough and the port is on the Atlantic side, right? I think that is one of the challenges that we have. Tobago has about 4 or 5 natural harbors, and Scarborough is not one, right? Most of them are on the Caribbean side, right? And we know where they are. There's Grand Cortland Bay, there's a bay up in Charlottesville, Palativia, and all of them are naturally protected and deep, right? There's been the argument of Cove being used as an area as well. Cove has a massive reef in front of it, Flying Reef, Stingray Alley, all those are big reefs that actually are blocking the land. And any kind of dredging or anything that happens anywhere in that area is going to affect everything downwind or heading downwind of that. So those are issues that are actually need to be looked at. I'm not quite sure if the engineers have those things in mind or if they have that information as they go forward. Right. So I think in a follow-up to Dr. Pemberton's first question, I think the question really was what is being done as regard to the underwater relics in the harbor in Scarborough if they are to move forward with that particular location for the port. Thank you.
Dave Elliott, thank you very much. You are one of our special people tonight because aside from my panelists, I have our Secretary of the Division of Infrastructure, Quarries and Urban Development, Mr. Trevor James, and he will respond to your question this afternoon. Mr. James?
Hi, good evening. Good evening to Tobago. Good evening to my cousin Dave Elliott. The wrecks in the harbor in Scarborough, we have proposed to build a new museum on the reclaimed land and to lift those wrecks out. That's a critical part of the project. We understand the value of that to us as a historical, Scarborough being a historical site, and that is one of the first projects we will undertake. We have to also bear in mind in Tobago that for every development, if you look at Port of Spain, if you look at any state in America, every development that is undertaken, we as a people will have to give up something. The wrecks, for example, have been there for 400 years, and they've been of little or no value to us as a tourist diving site. We make no economy from it, but in the development plan that we have, we plan to find a way to monetize those wrecks and bring them to land, and that will be done once the feasibility studies are concluded. In terms of whether the port can be built on the Caribbean side or should be built on the Caribbean side as opposed to the Atlantic side of the island, we have to decide in Tobago whether our economy in the next 50 years can sustain 2 or 3 ports. And if we can project 50 years down and we can determine that, then we can provide for it today. However, there are other studies that show that Scarborough was the most ideal port in all of Tobago. That's why the British moved the capital to Scarborough, because Scarborough provided a protective port for which they can enter. So while we hear the concerns and we will consider them, the plan is to have the investigative side of the development take its course, and they may come up with information that suggests we must move out of the port out of Scarborough, and we'll rely on that data when that data is available. But for now, we are projecting to build out the port in the city, which in my opinion is where it belongs.
Thank you very much, Secretary James. Crystal Edwards, good evening. Do you have a question or comment for us, Crystal Edwards? Crystal Edwards, you would need to unmute your mic. Thank you. Good evening.
As it relates to the studies leading into the selection of the port, being weighed heavily on the historical reasons as to why the port was chosen. I'm asking that consideration. I'm going to have
to stop you and ask you to speak a little bit louder and start over with your question, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you a bit better now.
Okay, so as it relates to some of the comments that would have preceded my contribution, I would like to endorse consideration be given into the studies for the revitalization of Scarborough, taking into consideration all stakeholders, not just the infrastructural development and the residents in the area, but the fact that Scarborough also is home to a part of our fishing industry. And the fact that we are leaning heavily on the historical reason as to why the port was chosen for that part in Tobago. I hope that the studies, as was indicated by the Honorable Secretary, would also take into consideration that all those years ago when that was selected, maybe the science and data in this generation would prove otherwise in terms of the selection of the location. I do support the fact that more benthic studies need to be done in the area. Some studies have been given before. And if we are looking at similarities around the Caribbean, even Grenada, which was used as an example in the presentation, we would see that Grenada also has done very well in terms of identifying themselves as the wreck capital of the Caribbean, wrecks underwater that they have monetized and turned into dive sites. Tobago, in establishing what it is we would like to be known for, not at the risk of circumventing the need for our development to move forward, but also ensuring that we do sustainable development and ensure that all sectors get a piece of the pie, has to consider whether or not preservation of our marine spaces is important to us as well. And with taking that into consideration, my question would be, or rather suggestion would be, that we do look into monetizing these dive sites, because in my experience and based on research, it has shown that taking wrecks out of the water, it's actually very costly to move, and secondly, very costly to maintain, because the degradation out of the saline environment that they're used to would require a lot of maintenance. Right, for us to monetize that and for it to last for any period of time that we could see justification. So as we use those green spaces, I think that the engineer Trustra would have mentioned, use their rooftops and their surfaces for this. It would be jointly used as a cooling opportunity for Scarborough. It could be used to aid, as he would have indicated, in dealing with the runoff, but beautification. If there is a code to be established and enforced, this would be something to be taken into consideration. Not all our buildings need to be painted the same color, but that they do take into consideration the use of alternative sources of energy to try to negate some of our carbon output as an island in Tobago. So those would be two of my main points. As an avid diver and a marine biologist myself, that as Tobago takes into consideration the development of the port, we do take into consideration the other sectors that share that space, because the fishermen in Scarborough have had plans for their area for quite a while, and consultation with other departments and those sectors would, I think, bear well if it is we give them the consideration necessary on how they would like to see their aspect of Scarborough developed as well.
Ms. Edwards, thank you very much for your contribution. We're moving swiftly along. Mr. Earl James, good evening, sir. Mr. James, if you would unmute your mic, we will take your comments and questions. Good evening, Mr. James.
Good afternoon. Are you hearing me?
I am.
Right. I would be brief.
Thank you.
I am concerned about two areas that I did not hear. I don't expect much details, but I didn't hear anything mentioned about it. The first one, although I hear the buzzwords, eco, green, sustainable, where does the botanical gardens fit into the whole redevelopment of Scarborough? That's the first question. And the second one, I think Dr. Pemberton probably mentioned it, was the historical aspect. And from what I saw from the proposals, the architectural proposals or layout or stuff like that, I am concerned about two buildings that I have not seen in those projections. That is Customs House and the Old Works Building. Whether or not we are going to do some restorative work on them and use them for other purposes. And I heard Secretary James just mention about building a museum, and I wish to suggest that those two buildings be considered for some sort of a exhibition hall, as it were. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. James. Brendan Gray. Good evening, sir.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. As I said last week, I'm excited about this project, and I'm excited about what TOBAGO and Scarborough is going to look like. Reverend Prescott really brought back some memories about Scarborough when I was growing up as a young man in the 50s, how Scarborough looked. But my main concern today is, okay, we are going to consider, the consideration is to reclaim some of the sea to develop the port. Am I right with that? That's what I'm hearing. If so, can this reclamation area be used as a duty-free zone? Have that been a consideration in terms of that being considered for advertisement and for marketing purposes, so that the cruise ships coming in will utilize this area, the guests and the visitors can use this area as a duty-free area so that they can purchase stuff and leave. That way they'll get some hard currency for the economy of Tobago. I see this project not only as warranted and necessary and needed, but I see it as a means of Tobago seeking its rightful place, seeking its where it needs to go, what needs to happen. How do we develop a Tobago economy? How can we do that? Is it that we must consider the environment alone? We want to work around the environment, but we need to understand how do we really create an economic environment here in Tobago? What must be the parameters? What must be the driving factors? Is it education? Is it health? Or all these things must be done. And what must come first? And I feel, in my view, we're on the right track. I think we need to use this project as the fillip to developing an economy here in Tobago and driving and keeping our residents in Tobago. So I'm excited about the project, and I want to leave you with that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gray, for your contribution. I am going to throw you over a bit to Mr. Stewart, because I know he's been listening attentively to what you've been asking. Just to give a brief comment for me on Mr. Gray's question.
Concerning the question of duty-free shopping, we have separated the domestic terminal from the cruise ship terminal in order to provide duty-free zones in the new international terminal. We also have planning to propose different activities at different strategic sites around Scarborough and around Tobago, which will help the entrepreneurs to apply their trade to begin to generate income and to develop the economic status of Tobago. So yes, we have considered duty-free shopping and to maximize the hard currency with the additional cruise ships entering the harbour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart. Richard J. via Zoom, good evening.
Yes, good evening. Are you hearing me? Hello, good afternoon. Are you hearing me?
I am hearing you, Mr. Richard.
Hello?
Good evening.
Good afternoon to the Chief Secretary, the Secretary for Public Works, Mr. James, Mr. Dustin, and all the assistants and secretaries who are here. I just want to be brief because, as I said, I believe in this project. I think this project is going to show the way not only for Tobago, but it's going to show the way for how things have to be done to redevelop and re-diversify the island state of Trinidad and Tobago. There are a couple of things that I just wanted to briefly mention because I know time is of the essence, and I've attended all of the 3 webinars. One of the things that I want to point out, and I think several of the people who contributed talked about it, is not so much in terms of, how should I say, when we're looking at the Port of Scarborough, I know there's a lot of back and forth as to whether there should be a dedicated port, like for example, tourism only in Scarborough, or whether you can have container and tourism at the same time. I would like, hopefully, for the panel to consider if it, when you're looking at using the Port of Scarborough principally for dual use, that you look at consideration for other areas. I point to that because of my experience working in logistics also, as I have said before, I'm in finance, I've done logistics, and I live in New York. And if you look specifically to the Manhattan Island, it's very concise area. Manhattan and the Greater New York area is a very concise area. And what you have is, you have dedicated ports for tourism, and at the same time, they've removed the container port to the Holland Hook area, which is in Staten Island, and the port of Kearney. This is also in the Dominican Republic. So I'm just saying in terms of, I know Secretary James talked about the establishment of where the port should be, and I'm saying that you also have to look at the natural progression. Tobago has 116 square miles, and I know the priority is land use. The land in Tobago is very expensive. It's going to be driven up even more, I believe. So this is why I'm saying that when the panel is looking, that if they can consider that, because the issue of congestion, and I can tell you from experience owning a logistics company, where people did not want to come into New York because of congestion, and that there's been serious degradation because of these heavy tractor trailers. You have to pay, like for example, HUD, higher use taxes. So that's one of the things that I hope that they would look at, whether you're considering Scarborough versus Plymouth, whether it's Cove, and you have to look at the continuity of in terms of building out as we go forward. Because if you're looking to possibly build, for example, factories and bonded warehouse, is the land use optimal in that Scarborough area? So that's one of the areas I would like to point out. The second area that I would like to, is more or less of a comment, and I think the panelists had hit the nail on the head, is in terms of optimal financing. To do this project, as a person who's done this, working with international banks and working in Trinidad and various areas, there are several pieces to the puzzle. So in terms of for example, I think I brought that point up, and I think Dr. Thomas also talked about that, as well as Dr. Boris. The issue of land use is very, very important. housing is an issue that can be addressed with possibly looking at air rights. I go back to my example, living in New York, living in Manhattan, how they utilize air rights. I don't know if the current country would approve it. It would be most likely they talked about, the panelists, the esteemed panelists talked about improving the economy for the Tobago House of Assembly to get the current country planning zoning economy. And that is very important because I think that is going to be, in my humble suggestion, an area where you can bring in density. It's going to have to monetize this project. If you look at financing through equity from government, there may be challenges from that. The central government may go back and forth. You may not get optimal financing, so you may have to look at CIP, project coming in from different sources, and also the grant funding, which they pointed out, because there's a green fund program that is coming through. So I think if we have to look at paying for all these infrastructural development programs, the underground, electrical grid, water and sewage, the green energy, those are considerations I hope that the panelists must look at, because just from my humble experience, I think you have to have an optimal capital structure to fund any project, and it has to come from a combination of equity, possibly debt, and grant funding. So those are the more comments, it's not really questions, but that's my observations, and I'm hoping that the esteemed panel can look at that and look into that in terms of the feasibility. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for your comments. I have a caller online, and I've been waiting for a caller online all evening. But at the risk of mispronouncing your name, I would say, Mr. Patrick, good evening.
Yeah, good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Yeah, my contribution is that turn the whole the old Botanic Gardens into a history park. Alright? It's the, well, when you enter Robinson Crusoe domain. Not Robinson Crusoe, yeah. Crusoe, right? His cave, his thing. His cave and where he used to live. And then you go to all the different nations that had fought over Tobago. You highlight each one of them in a certain way, right? And so we having a history, and we go straight down to when the guy the slave who had rebelled, we highlight him down to the next, right? That is what I also proposing, that you move the car park, you build a multi-story car park in the old Nipdeck, not Nipdeck, NIS mall, and you use that whole area. So when they come off at the cruise ship, they're going straight into Robinson Crusoe. We used to you prepare. We used to live his cave and the Man Friday. And then from there you have like the English and the French and all of them, you highlight all of them into things. Yes. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that is my idea of using the whole botanic gardens, and on a Sunday afternoon or so, you have people coming to visit the whole thing with the Robinson Crusoe, the cave, the this, the that, the other, and all this. There are different nations that fought over Tobago. We highlight them,
Yes, that is a really good idea. I am sure that the team is listening. I know for myself that I think that your idea is really great, and I thank you for calling in. I still can't pronounce your surname, but you have great ideas. Thank you. I will take, and I just want to remind everyone, I have a few more persons on Zoom that want to ask questions, but we're wrapping up. As you can see, we're 5 minutes to 7. And so I'll take a few more questions, but I urge you to be very, very brief in your questions or comments so that we can take as many people as possible. Henry Critchlow, good evening.
Hi. I would just like to take less than a minute to give you my thoughts on this. I think we should look at this not from just the point of view of what has happened in the past in the Caribbean or other areas, but I think in making this plan for the future of Tobago, Scarborough in particular, we should look at what innovations are coming down the pipeline. Let's look at this from 30,000 feet and see that what has been done in areas like Martinique and Puerto Rico and other places has been the past. We need to look at what's going to happen in the next 20 to 30 years and see what's being done around the world and use those ideas to go forward. At this point, what is behind us is always going to be behind us. So we have to look at what is coming and take these innovations that are on the table being planned by other people and try to inject those into Tobago and make it work. And by the way, I was glad to see all the faces that were online today, like Prescott and David Elliott and Lois. I know all these guys. We grew up in Wilson Road together. So I just want to make my contribution that we look to the future and try to innovate with what's coming and focus on a path forward, not looking back too much. Thank you very much, Chairman, Chairwoman, Madam, and I wish everybody that's involved in this the best, and I hope we can pull it off.
Thanks for your comments and your kind gesture, sir. Kenneth Lewis, good evening. Kenneth Lewis?
Are you hearing me?
I am now, sir.
Okay, good evening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to say my 2 pence. I have a very simple question. Will this proposed development allow Tobago to answer the question, how will Tobago compete in the world? That to me has to be our starting point. We need foreign exchange, and the only way we're going to get it is if we are able to compete successfully in the world. So I think whatever we do, whatever development we propose, it must be focused on that, answering that simple, very simple question. I throw it out and I'll leave that to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, sir. iPad, good evening. iPad, are you hearing me? Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you, iPad.
Oh, hi, I'm Colleen. I'm calling from London. Just really interestingly, I've been following your seminars from beginning to now. And I'm quite excited to see where we're going in Tobago. I was brought up in Tobago. I now live in London. I'm preparing to retire and come back to Tobago. So one of the things that I'm wanting to find out tonight, I've noted that you've got it in phases, the short-term and long-term plans. Have we got a timeline in regards to when this exciting project will be on the ground?
Thank you for your question. I will ask the panel just to briefly, because I know for a fact that we haven't hammered down timelines very specifically as yet, but just to briefly go over what the next steps in a project like this would be.
So want me to answer it? Yes, so the next 3 months, in-depth feasibility study will be undertaken. The market research, economic impact, coastal impact of our proposal will be done, after which we'll be able to add a proper timeline as to how we're going to do different phases of the project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stewart, for your response. George Stanley Baird, it's always a pleasure to hear from you, sir. Good evening.
Good evening, everyone. It's a very simple story. It's an appeal to the Secretary to try his best to go via international agencies, IADB, the OAS, whoever, to really get a physical development planner seconded to his department so that some of the issues in terms of, I listen to water and where and what we do, in terms of zonings, we have that capacity on board. It is not hard to find. IADB, the works, right? World Bank even, let him start talking there. Let him see who they can find to second. It's not going to cost the assembly anything, maybe but housing, etc. But let's do it. It was done in the past, but this project is one because it's building out. It's not just about one focus. It's a build out of many things. And therefore, to me, we have one attempt to get it right. Many of the years have passed. We have not been getting some right. This is our opportunity to get it right, and therefore, he must have the tin soldiers, not only the team, but the tin soldiers in other areas to make him sure-footed as a mountain goat. Sure-footedness is what we require now. I think it's the last attempt we have to do anything for our homeland. Pleasant good evening to all.
Mr. Baird, I know that my secretary will agree with you that sure-footedness is where we should be. And he has heard your comment, and I am pretty sure before the night is out, he will respond in some kind to your comment. As we go further in the program this evening, I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome our very special guest that I hinted to you earlier today would be on tonight. Tonight we have with us to bring us greetings and comments, etc., the Honorable Fali Augustine, Chief Secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, to bring you his perspective on the virtual public consultations for the Scarborough redevelopment. Good evening, sir.
Good evening to you. Good evening to your panel, and good evening to Tobagonians far and wide. We are happy that so many of you from within the diaspora have been contributing to our conversation about Scarborough. Additionally, we are seeing many people who are not from here, but also excited about the prospects of rebuilding Scarborough and making Scarborough a place that we can all be proud of. From where I sit, I hold no extra special claim to Scarborough. I am not from Scarborough. I don't own land in Scarborough. I don't own business in Scarborough. And I am perhaps forever a country boy come to town. And in coming here, I've been asking myself a question that many people in my generation have been asking themselves for quite a while. What kind of town did we inherit? What kind of capital did we inherit? And what kind of capital city we would like to have? You know, my first major interaction with Scarborough started after age 10 and after passing common entrance and having to come to school in Scarborough at Bishop's High School. And in those days, Scarborough seemed like a big city to me. In those days, coming from Speyside, Scarborough seemed like it had it all. I mean, there was the NIB Mall, the place we were not supposed to loiter in, and the place we spent many times ducking Mr. Sosa or Sebrew to ensure that we are not found loitering in town. The payphones that were around that we used to prank call people. Scarborough just seemed like the place to be. The bus terminus, which sat where the Division of Finance now is. Scarborough at the time looked as if it was everything. But as I grew older, I recognized how immobile Scarborough is, how dysfunctional Scarborough is, and the need for us to do something more about Scarborough. And the question is, what kind of town did we inherit? And if we are honest with ourselves, we will say that the generations before me, I'm only 36 years old, the generations before me passed on to us a Scarborough that is smelly, a Scarborough that is congested, a Scarborough that is difficult to get through when one ship docks in the port, a Scarborough with a harbour that was famously called a duck pond, and perhaps, maybe rightfully so, given that if we have one ship docked in the harbour, we can't have a second. We inherited a Scarborough where we have utility lines cobwebbing the sky and obscuring the beautiful view that we have. We have a Scarborough where people still struggle to catch a car, as we say, or to get transportation, especially to go to the outlying regions on the island. We have a Scarborough with a botanical gardens where the grass is all parched and brown and dying and weeds taking over the place. And I asked myself if this is the Scarborough that we all should be proud of. A city is supposed to be a reflection of all the peoples that reside in that place, in that territory. And is Scarborough our best to look? The Tobago I know is a Tobago where whether you're poor or rich, our homes are kept immaculately. We like nice things. We like planting beautiful flowers. We like taking time to paint the house. And many of you who called in today or gave commentary today, you grew up in homes where you knew what it is to have to varnish the chairs and to polish the floors and to wash the china and to keep your surroundings immaculate. So why isn't that translated into the tongue that we have? Why wasn't that even translated into the tongue that we inherited? But notwithstanding that, we have a city, a town with a lot of potential, a significant amount of potential. And if we handle it well, it will result in a city that we all can be extremely proud of. I always recall the first time I traveled beyond the Caribbean and traveled, in fact, the first time I traveled beyond the Caribbean, I traveled to Australia and traveled to Queensland. And I wondered, why couldn't we have a city that is equally green and is as efficient and has nice buildings that are architecturally pleasing? And then I could recall the first time I went to London and I wondered, why couldn't we have a city where there's efficiency in terms of transportation, public transportation at that. We were crying a few days ago about the fact that our taxi drivers have just increased the fare, but we exist in a town where you sit in a bus shed, and perhaps we need to get out of the bus shed stage and start thinking about transportation hubs and so on. But we sit in a bus shed and you're not sure whether the public bus will arrive or not arrive, and there is no sign anywhere, no electronic signs to say what time the next bus will arrive. And the first time I went to the US, I wondered, but why couldn't we just get a place that is as efficient, that is as nice? And what is sad is that many Tobagonians travel abroad and enjoy traveling abroad and enjoy the efficiencies they experience outside of this space. And yet somehow we return and try to make ourselves comfortable in what has evolved into a shanty town. And we can do better. And the whole objective of these consultations and the thrust towards developing Scarborough is from a perspective that we can do better and we should do better. We should do better than what we are doing now. And so how do we do better and how do we improve on Scarborough? How do we make Scarborough much more efficient? And yes, we have been discussing this in terms of phases. And please don't think for a minute that as Secretary of Finance, Trade and Economy, I have a bag with sufficient funds somewhere that we could just pay for all of this immediately. I would love to tell you tonight that I have found some billions that we could just do all of this immediately. But I can't. And so we have to phase this project, starting with the things that we may consider low-hanging fruits, and build out to the larger things and finding creative ways to fund what we need to fund. But we have to have a big plan. We have to have a long-term plan. We have to have a vision. No city anywhere in the world got to where they are now without a long-term plan and a big and great vision for the place. And that's what this is about, a big and great vision for this city we call Scarborough. And I'm calling it a city, although no, it's not. I'm calling it a city because perhaps the power of life and death is in the tongue and I could speak it into being. But how do we make Scarborough much more efficient? And there are several things that we have to look at. And I wrote some things down on a cue card while coming here. I wrote down the fact that we need a Scarborough that is efficient, that is conducive to business, a Scarborough that will result in the creation of jobs and offer better livelihoods, a Scarborough that will see increased economic growth and improve social inclusions. So we're not looking to build a Scarborough for the rich and the famous and those who already have money. We're looking to build a Scarborough so that everyday Joes and people that come to town from country like me could make it in town and could make a life in town and could experience some measure of social inclusion. We need a Scarborough that promotes the coupling of living and economic growth for environmental resource use. We need a Scarborough that pays attention to the ecosystems around, a green Scarborough, and a Scarborough that alleviates both urban and rural poverty, because if we build Scarborough well, not only will there be an alleviation of urban poverty, but we can see people from rural areas benefiting. After all, the island is a very small island. And if you get a Scarborough that works well, then the youth man that is somewhere up in Castara right now can have opportunities in Scarborough 25 to 30 minutes away. I must tell you of an experience I had in Jamaica as a way of sharing with you what urban improvement can do for our lives. It's no secret I spent quite a bit of time in Jamaica. I was there for 4 years, and for a while I was visiting Jamaica every single year. I've not been able to go since 2017 because I ended up entering a thing called politics and not finding time to visit Jamaica. But I can recall the first time I went downtown Kingston, I got robbed of my cell phone. Couldn't tell my mother anything because of course she would be worried sick that her one boy picnic in Jamaica and get robbed on his first excursion downtown on a Saturday night of all times. But I returned to Jamaica some years after leaving Jamaica and walked downtown, and I saw that the streets that were once smelly and the buildings, the colonial buildings looking dilapidated and so on, those streets now had pavers and cobblestones, and they had the artists came in and they did murals all along these old buildings, and they restored the Ward Theatre downtown, and there were new restaurants downtown and hotels going up, and the new parliament was scheduled to be built downtown, and you know they were driving the music scene downtown and having reggae on the streets and so on. And I said, but wow, is this the same downtown that I got robbed in some years earlier? Is this the same downtown that was smelly, that had vagrants, that had higglers and hustlers and people trying to push you out of the way? This was now a downtown that was looking clean and was looking better than the Scarborough that was once better than the downtown Kingston. Why am I telling you this story? I mean, this is not, we're not trying to build out Kingston. We're trying to build out Scarborough. So why am I telling you this story? I'm telling you this story because this anecdote is important in underscoring what the development of a city can do for you. It's not just about bragging rights about who could fix town and who could fix town the best. But it's about building a Scarborough that is efficient and that will lead to economic development for all of our people. And so how do we get to that place? And as an executive, one of the things we have discussed and considered is that we need to install almost immediately a Scarborough Development Committee, a committee that will have some measure of oversight over all that we are doing. And yes, we have some brilliant young engineers here, and can I tell you, I'm very proud of these young engineers, because once upon a time in the Tobago space, any discussion about fixing Scarborough will be dominated by people who were grey in the head and who had lived their lives. And so I am so happy that this division is entrusting a project of this magnitude to young, bright Tobagonian minds, to progressive minds. So I'm proud of you young Tobagonians who are leading this charge. And so this committee will provide a measure of oversight, because to be honest, the division in and of itself should not be the only entity trying to spearhead this movement. And as much as this is a brainchild of Secretary James, it is not Secretary James's project. This is not Trevor's project. This is Tobago's project. It's all our own. And so Secretary James suggested that we have this committee that will provide some measure of oversight. And when we looked at it earlier today at Executive Council, we decided almost immediately what are some of the components should be part of this committee. We should have people on this committee that knows the history of Scarborough or understands history from an expert level, because we have quite a bit of history to be preserved in the Tobago space. Those that cannot allow for efficiency and modernization, we put it in a museum somewhere in town and allow people to have a look at it. This committee must also have someone representing landowners on the committee, because quite a number of individuals within the Scarborough space, or quite a lot of our lands in the Scarborough space are privately owned. We need civil engineer on this committee. We need a town planner on this committee. We need coastal engineer on the committee. We need an architect on this oversight committee. We need someone to represent the business interests on this committee. Someone to represent tourism, being our most significant industry outside of the government sector at the moment, on this committee. And we need someone who is into tropical landscaping and the environment on this committee. And what this committee will do is that this committee will continue the work with these young, brilliant minds that have been doing the build-out for us, that have been answering your questions so ably, that have been engaging you these past few weeks. This committee will ensure that all of the things that will come out of the report from these consultations will be attended to, and that we are coming up with the best plans for Scarborough. We need to begin our work by looking at the things we can do almost immediately. What are some of those things, those projects we can attack early on and get them over with, get them dispensed with? Perhaps we can look at the botanical gardens and the need to have that restored to some semblance of what a modern green space or green park should look like and feel like, a place where families could go and have picnics and not be worried about security issues, or worried that the bottom of the park is always muddy or wet whenever rain falls. Perhaps early on we could tackle the issue with those overhead lines. And my God, TSTT and TNTech and the whole lot have done us quite an injustice, just leaving a lot of old lines to obscure the view, not caring to run the lines properly at all. Maybe that could be an initial project. Maybe we need to look at a transportation hub, and coming from the countryside and knowing what it is to catch car and catch bus. I have been arguing for a long time that one of the things we need to do within these 4 years, is to ensure we have a transportation hub that will allow for the efficient dissemination of public transport, and that we ought to attached to our buses, GPS locators, and have these electronic tickers at our bus stops. I hate the word bus shed. At our bus stops. So you know when the next bus is coming, you know when a bus is cancelled, you know how to move. Perhaps earlier in the game we need to look at what is happening in that Tiantec block. Because I don't know that Tiantec needs that block that looks so ugly and dirty and untidy. When Tiantec is not generating electricity down in Cove. Maybe we need to embark on a project to look at all of those derelict buildings in and around town and begin to move them down and break them down and ensure that we have some clear lines of vision and that we're not seeing buildings threatening to fall down on the public. And maybe we need to begin to buy some buckets of paint so that these stores that have not had a good painting in donkey years will just at least paint the storefront, at least have a nice sign, at least look decent and neat and tidy. I don't know, I'm not an expert, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a town planner. But we have to get started. Tobago, we have to get started. We have been whining and complaining about Scarborough for a long time. And as your Chief Secretary, I'm here to tell you, we have to get started. And we better get started soon and quickly. Because if we don't get started, all of this fancy work that is done, all of the resources we put into meeting with you will be on somebody's shelf somewhere as a white paper or some color paper and just pick up dust. And then someone will come down the road 10 years from now and come up with a whole new plan, a whole other plan. So let's get started. And part of getting started is about personal responsibility. And I want to end on the note of personal responsibility. If you want to see Scarborough look better, then you can't be just dropping your garbage on the side of the road. If you want Scarborough to look and feel better, then you have to pay attention to your storefront. Oh gosh, hang up a little frock in the storefront, make the place look nice now. Put a little mannequin in front. Behave as though you're doing some decent business. Hang up some lights somewhere to dazzle someone somewhere. That's personal responsibility. The teacher can't come in your store to tell you that you should not have 1,000,001 things stuck on a shelf. And if you're in watch where walking, things fall along and bust your head inside the store. That's personal responsibility. And if you know you are a private land owner in Tobago, in the Scarborough, or you own private property in Scarborough, and the building is hundreds of years old and you have not maintained it and it looks as if it's falling over on top of people, we shouldn't have to come to nail up a notice to tell you break down the building or we will have to break it down and charge you for breaking it down. That's your personal responsibility. And if it is you believe Scarborough should do better, you have a responsibility to do better. All of us. Those of us that park indiscriminately around the town, come on. Part of getting Scarborough to become more efficient means that you will not park and say, well, I don't care. I have to park up right in the door mouth at the store. You don't care if you obstruct the traffic. Personal responsibility means that you're using the pedestrian crossing and you're not crossing where you feel to cross and then turn into the driver and say, bounce me down now. If we really want Scarborough to look better and to feel better, it starts with you and me doing better. It starts with us taking personal responsibility for how we interact with this space called Scarborough. And it also calls for us to take some very, very hard decisions. Some extremely hard decisions. A week ago, I was informed that we have somebody building in what is earmarked on the map of Scarborough as a road reserve. But somebody busy building out their whole foundation on a road reserve. Obviously, that person must know that they are not owners of the land. It's public land. It doesn't belong to them. But this sense of entitlement to doing that which is wrong has to stop if you are to fix Scarborough. It means that if you are to play a trade in Scarborough and all you have is a food cart or a little caboose that you're trying to sell something out of, that you have to ensure that it looks neat and it looks tidy. And you're not spitting on the corner and throwing some water on the corner right there while pedestrians trying to use the sidewalk. We all have to do better. That's where it starts. It doesn't start with a nice fancy new port. It doesn't start with coming and dredging the ocean bed in Scarborough. It doesn't start with building our own twin towers in town. It starts with a realization that each and every one of us have to do better. Each and every one of us have to ensure that we work towards building a Scarborough that we all can be proud of. At the moment, we all agree on one thing. We're not proud of Scarborough. We are not proud of Scarborough. And Scarborough does not look good. It does not feel good. It is inefficient. So what are we going to do about it? And I hope to God that after all of these consultations and the resources we're using to have this bill out, that we are actually going to put boots on the ground and do some work. We're actually going to do some work. I could tell you almost immediately, right now we are engaging with the IDB, and the head of the IDB was here last week, and I met with her, well, the country manager that is, and I met with her along with Secretary James, and we started discussing what we need to do in Scarborough. And I heard from Mr. Baird about getting the technical help from these organizations. She actually told us that we could get the kind of technical help and bill out we need from them at no cost to us. That's part of their grant arrangement. So we have already been having those discussions. We have already been talking about how to make the place look good, feel good, and work good. 3 sets are good. Look good, feel good, and work good. Those 3 things. We are already having those conversations and ready to bill out. So let's get started, Tobago. As I said, it's not a PDP project. It's not a Trevor project. It's not a Works project. It's not them young bright boys and girls project. It's not a Farley project. See it as your project. Even if you live way up in the bush, right up in Lansome, it is your project too. Scarborough belongs to every single one of us. Not just the landowners in Scarborough. It belongs to all of us. So let's see how you can contribute. And starting today, starting this moment, we are all working towards making Scarborough much more efficient. Making it look good, feel good, and work good. Those 3 things. And perhaps when we get that done, we are well on our way to making Tobago the greatest little island on the planet. And I will forever say that is a potential that we have, and a potential that we need to give birth to. And so I thank you for this opportunity, Secretary James and the Division of Infrastructure. Thank you for this opportunity, for coming and sharing at this consultation. Thank you for this opportunity to try to inspire someone in the Tobago space to do better. Thank you for talking to you through your homes, through your devices, and I pray that we'll be able to get this done. I believe we can get this done this time. And when we do that, we can become the envy of the region once again. I assure you that the Tobago that was well fought over so many times is not the Tobago we have made it into right now. We can do better. So let's do better. And let's build out a Scarborough that we all can be proud of. So thank you very much for this opportunity to just speak to you for a few minutes.
And it was a pleasure having you on tonight, Chief Secretary. And we look forward to having more conversations with you as we move on into other phases of the consultations and other phases of the planning and development of Tobago and of Scarborough. So thanks for being with us tonight. And in the vein of what the Chief Secretary said of taking personal responsibility, I will now like to hand you over to the man with the plan, the man with the vision, the man that has personal responsibility. Our line secretary, Mr. Trevor James.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My job right now is just to say thank you. Thank you to the division and the employees of the division that participated in this process, that took over the process, for the support to the vision that you all have demonstrated, the engineers, Ms. Frank, the communications team. Thank you to TOBAGO for participating in the consultations, and to be assured that we are in fact going to collate the information we've received and pass it on to the design team as they begin to do their assessments, and we will come back to you in maybe 3 months to reconsult again with more advanced plans. And we just want to ask, as the Chief Secretary has said, that we all buy into the idea of the project, we all buy into the vision, because we desperately need in Tobago this project to transform the economy of Tobago, and we could only do it if all of Tobago buys in and supports it, and participate in the consultations, give their ideas. So we are building out something that brings to fore the vision of all of Tobago, and if we do that, we'll build something great and something grand. So thank you, and have a blessed night.
Thank you very much, Secretary James. Now, this was the first series of consultations, and they were very riveting, informative, exciting, and it was all because of you, our viewers. So we thank you for being with us. In the interim, in between now and the next set of consultations, you can send us your comments, your ideas to publicconsult.diqudtha@gmail.com, or you can leave your comments on our Facebook page. We are awaiting all of that. We're excited to continue hearing from you. And with a second set of consultations on the horizon and plans being developed, we have much to look forward to, and it's an exciting time to be alive. It's an exciting time to be a citizen of Tobago. I am Nadia Franjan, and it was a pleasure serving you as your host for this series of consultations. So until next time, keep envisioning a Scarborough that is redeveloped. Continue to think good thoughts. Continue to think about a good city, about a redeveloped Scarborough. And so until we see you again at our second phase of our virtual public consultations, we say thank you and good night.